gives me enormous pleasure to welcome Nicola Blackwood, the Minister with responsibility to rare diseases. She is under the cosh for time, so we will press on. But I just wanted to pay tribute to the engagement that you have had with the whole rare disease issue and the importance of the commitment that you have made to keeping this issue on the political front burner. And we look forward to your thoughts about the future development following the conclusion of the current rare disease strategy at the end of next year, and how you see us, this audience, contributing ideas to the development of where we go from here in order to maintain the progress and the momentum that we have generated since the strategy was first published in 2013. So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Alistair, and good afternoon, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and it's a real privilege, honestly, to be sharing a room with so many health leaders, innovators, but also powerful advocates for rare disease. Events like this are hugely valuable when they bring together research and industry communities together with their most important partner, really, who are patients. Bringing the right people together in this sector is what makes things happen and unlocks solutions where sometimes it feels like those solutions might never be found. And we've already heard here today, and I know from discussions that I've had before I came into this room, some amazing examples and opportunities for fruitful collaborations. And I really want to thank everybody who has made today happen, because you are the people who give us hope that we can change the landscape for patients with rare diseases up and down this country, some of whom really feel at the moment as though they don't have any hope of that change happening. So I just want to open by thanking you for the work that you do. I know that sometimes it feels as though the work that you do is going unseen. It is not unseen. It is seen by those of us in Westminster, but it is also seen by those patients up and down the country who will benefit from your work. As a patient myself with a rare disease who for many years felt as though I would never get a diagnosis, I had first-hand knowledge of the frustration and despair of searching for diagnosis and treatment, which for some is elusive for years, for others it can last a lifetime. And I know what it feels like to go from specialist to specialist and to tell your story again and again, and to see the doubts creeping into the eyes of your specialist when they wonder if perhaps you're making some of it up. And sometimes you walk out of that clinic room and you start to wonder, am I really getting this right? And you start to doubt yourself. And I know the overwhelming relief which comes when you finally get that diagnosis, even if there is no silver bullet treatment at the point at which you get the diagnosis, because at least you know that you weren't actually going mad along the way. And that is a hugely important moment in a patient's life. And that's why this job for me, as a health minister for rare diseases, has been so important. But just as with care for rare diseases, having no particular silver bullet sometimes in terms of treatment, what I've learnt as a health minister for this, there is no silver bullet in terms of policy for rare diseases where there is so much heterogeneity in terms of the challenges which we are all familiar with, whether it is in terms of the diagnostic odyssey or access to treatment or coordination of care or the awareness amongst clinicians. But we must nevertheless not relent in our pursuit of finding these solutions, because our fight to bring an end to the diagnostic odyssey, for example, is absolutely fundamental. It is pernicious, even after diagnosis, in the way that it affects the mental health of patients and their families. And this must not be underestimated. So one thing that I have learnt, without a shadow of a doubt, during all of this process, from patient to minister, has been that innovation holds the key, not only to advancing diagnosis and treatment of care of rare diseases, but also that the whole process of innovation needs the thoughts, the preferences, the ideas, and also the data of patients at its core, because it is absolutely crucial that the experience of living with a rare condition shapes the priorities of new treatment and technology development, and of course also of policy. And we are determined that as we move from this period of the current strategy and into the new strategy, that will be a principle that is deeply embedded within our work. And I want to thank all of you here today who I know do this and have been doing this in the implementation of the current strategy, because I know that your work is often born out of painful experience and it comes at a cost. But you will, I know, never understand the impact that that work has. Now, I am very proud, I have to say, of the leading role that the NIHR has played in developing world-leading partnerships already between patients and the public, from its support for Involve, which promotes and advances public involvement across all of the NIHR activities, to the new website, which you may have seen, Be Part of Research, which is now helping people to more easily find out about health research and the relevance of them taking place across the UK. And this has already recruited almost 1 million people into clinical trials this year. And that is a hugely important part of the process to driving forward clinical research and innovation. And I know from my own experience that patient empowerment is obviously particularly important for those who are affected by rare diseases, when it can often feel like we're struggling alone. And that's why it's so important that we maintain the major focus that the UK Rare Diseases Strategy had on patient empowerment, and that our progress in this area, published earlier this year in the strategy implementation plan, is also driven forward in the new update as we begin to develop that with the national debate, which I called for just earlier this year. Because I am determined that we shall think about this in our next phase, and as we go forward, we will be producing new plans and new policies which will not only change the face of rare diseases policy in the UK, but will bring hope to patients up and down this country. But before we talk about that, I just want to thank you a little bit for what you have done to implement the rare diseases strategy already. Because the UK has a strong record of embedding the patient voice at the heart of innovation, and that is because of all of you here today. The groundbreaking 100,000 Genomes project, for example, included the participant panel, which ensured that the project was shaped by patient views and experience, and that the patient voice integrated across all aspects of the project. And the headline, of course, is that in December last year, the project completed its sequencing phase. It's delivered life-changing results to patients, around 25% of rare diseases patients getting a diagnosis for the first time. And for some conditions, that rate was as high as 60%, which is, of course, extraordinary. We are ahead of every other country in the world in delivering what is not just a research project, but a research project into clinical care. And I'm delighted that based on what are life-changing outcomes from this project, the NHS Medicines Service is now going to be announced, when it was announced in October last year, and this makes our country the first in the world to integrate genomic sequence into routine clinical care, and we will provide equitable access to genomic analysis across England. Now, we've outlined in the NHS long-term plan that under the GMS, seriously ill children who's likely to have a rare genetic disorder, children with cancer, adults suffering from certain rare conditions or specific cancers, are going to be offered this sequencing throughout 2019, and we're going to be continuing to push out the details of how this will be implemented over the next year. But what we want to hear as we develop more in the genomics healthcare strategy, but also in the upcoming rare diseases strategy, is information from you about how we can do that more effectively for patients with rare diseases, children with rare diseases, and how we can take into account the impact on families. And I hope that this signals an end to the diagnostic odyssey for so many ill children and adults, but I also hope that we can create a virtuous cycle of learning and research that can help us to intervene earlier even before symptoms are present, because pioneering research and collaboration are the cornerstone of earlier diagnosis, advancing treatment for rare diseases. And only last month, the government announced the world's largest genetics project, which is obviously the £200 million whole genome sequencing project for the 500,000 volunteers of UK Biobank, half of which will be sequenced just here at the Sanger Centre. And this is going to create the largest data repository to provide the best scientific minds, many of whom are no doubt here today, with invaluable data and information they need to carry out research. And this is how we are going to get closer to faster, more effective, real-time diagnostic solutions, but also to accessible treatments, which that we'll be able to improve care on the ground. And this will help us to include, obviously, our world-leading position in genomics, but also in care on the ground. But we don't only have a world-leading position in genomic sequencing, as important though that is, because the NHS has now become one of the first in the world to introduce CAR T treatments, and earlier this month NHS England also announced funding for new gene therapy for blindness in children. This is one of the most challenging parts of the rare diseases system that I find, which is it's all very well improving diagnostics and improving the strategy in terms of identifying ways to get patients into the system and into rare diseases care, but it's no use if you don't provide access to treatment and coordinated care once you get there. And that is why it is so important to me that NHS England are starting to provide more flexible ways of funding treatments, and we are now truly a global powerhouse in health research and innovation across the world, but also improving access through the Accelerated Access Collaborative, which we announced just in the autumn. And this has included also a £250 million investment in the National Artificial Intelligence Lab, which is intended to shortcut the route of clinical trials to reduce the cost of drug development and therefore reduce the cost of drugs and treatments so that we can fund more of those treatments and increase access. But while scientific achievements over recent years have been encouraging, I really am conscious that there remains much more to be done to improve the experience of patients with rare diseases. I myself know how it feels to be passed from pillar to post and to really struggle when you're sick, to coordinate your own care and to access the services that you need. So that's why I announced a national conversation on rare diseases in July to help us to inform a future framework on rare diseases, which will follow up on the current strategy. Because what we want to hear from staff, patients, experts, researchers, but also industry, so we can capture your views, capture your experiences on big strategic issues. We want to draw these together to help us to develop a strong, compelling strategic framework to improve care and the experience of people with rare diseases. We understand that we need to shortcut the diagnostic odyssey. We understand that we need to improve access to treatment, but we also need to improve care coordination, and we also need to improve awareness amongst clinicians. In order to do that, we need to hear from you about where the barriers are within the system and how we can practically and affordably improve that process. We won't be able to address every challenge in one go. We can't find one single silver bullet for the whole rare diseases community in one go. And the only way we're going to have any hope about making progress in this is if we gather together the evidence from you on the ground, the people who know this problem better than anybody in the world, and we take that evidence and we analyse it and we find the most effective interventions and we apply those in the most effective way. And I'm determined, as a minister with personal experience from that, with some excellent teams in the Rare Diseases Forum, in the National Genomics Board, and others who also are determined that we will make progress, that as we move forward from the current rare disease strategy to the next framework, we will find solutions that will turn a corner as we have new innovations, new technologies, and new opportunities to do this. I know that there are unmet needs across the rare diseases spectrum. I know that only determined and persistent deepening in our partnership with patients and with clinicians and with industry is going to give us any hope of making progress. I hope that you will partner with me in trying to do this. I hope that you will accept my thanks for the work that you have already done. I hope that you will believe me when I say that I see your sacrifice in the work that you have done until this point, and I hope that we will come back here next year and the year after, and we will be proud of the progress that we have made. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. There is a fast car outside with the doors open and the engine running, but we do have
within legal speed limits.
But we do have a few minutes for questions or reactions. There are some Glisser questions up here. So if we look at those, looking to review the criteria of the National Screening Committee. This isn't one that comes up a lot, isn't it? Because I guess there's a lot of support in the audience, particularly from rare disease patient groups, to see more conditions added to the newborn screening programme, and we tend to screen for fewer conditions than many of our European neighbours. Will you be looking at this as part of the process?
So Mike Richards is currently conducting a review of screening at the moment. He hasn't reported back yet, but it is a live consideration. Secretary of State Matt Hancock is personally very engaged with this question. And I personally also have been looking at it from a perspective of the strategy which is being developed of the National Genomic Healthcare Strategy, and thinking about what would be the most effective and also ethical way to develop newborn screening in the UK. If there were any thoughts or particular views that you would like to feedback from this conference, I would be very keen to hear them.
Great, thank you. Again, an issue that came up this morning about the availability of orphan drugs to UK patients compared with some of the other European Union nations, particularly Germany and France, where I think there are twice as many licensed therapies that are on the market that are routinely made available to patients in those countries, that the NHS has not yet got around to approving for application in this country.
So I think our drugs process is improving. The system between MHRA and NICE has sped up, and we have also started to approve around 85% of the rare disease drugs that do go through. Having said that, I recognise that the kind of drugs that are coming through the pipeline don't necessarily fit with the kind of HTA process that we have at the moment. And this is something which I meet regularly with industry, but also with patient groups to discuss. And that's why one of the first things that I did when I came in as the Life Sciences Minister was to ask NICE to kick off a commitment which had been arranged within the voluntary pricing agreement, which was to have a methodology review at NICE and to particularly consider this question, which is how medications, treatments and other conditions could get through the NICE methodology, thinking about the future pipeline and these particular kinds of medicines.
Now, you're the minister responsible for the NHS genomic medicine strategy, amongst many other things. Question up here saying that the 100,000 genomes had the patient participation panel, which you mentioned, and which you praised the contribution that it had made. Is there going to be a similar patient participation panel for the NHS genomic medicine service?
So I don't think they've nailed down exactly the format for patient participation, but the patient participation must be as equal, if not more engaged, in the future programmes. I saw a comment come up from someone who said, I'm the chair of the patient participation panel. Thank you. So can I say thank you back to you? The role of the patient participation panel in the 100,000 Genomes programme was absolutely critical for informing us how we would develop our consent programs, how we would develop our data sharing programs and so on. And so we need that as we go forward, and how as genomic data becomes increasingly relevant to diagnostics, to therapy development and so on. And as far as I'm concerned, the only way that we will drive forward innovation across the NHS, not just in genomics, is to have that level of patient and public engagement. And if anything, we are drawing the public and patients more deeply into the way in which we work.
A suggestion came up this morning that a fixed proportion of the return from the VPAS, the voluntary prescribing scheme, should be specifically reinvested, a ring-fenced fund set up to support rare diseases. Does that something that you can make happen?
You know what, I heard about that proposal before I even got in the door, Alistair. It's a really interesting proposal. I'd like to think about it. We are thinking at the moment about what we can do in order to create support for patients with rare diseases in different ways. One of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is the gap of support, but the need for holistic support for patients and families with rare diseases when it comes to maybe dealing with DWP or dealing with social care, and the knock-on, and how you can maybe have access, if you're very lucky, to the right kind of NHS support, but actually you could just be drowning in filling out forms for other care support, and that can be the thing that knocks you over the edge. And so I'm battling with that at the moment. We did implement the care coordination insert, which has started to be implemented through the NHS. We're at the moment testing that quite robustly to see if we think that that is going to make the difference that we're after. If it doesn't, then we're going to be exploring other options, including digital innovation solutions, and I will look at this proposal as well.
Thank you. You can't expect to get away without consideration the impact of Brexit, or the possible impact of Brexit. European...
Are you sure?
The doors are locked.
I've got my getaway card there.
I mean, it is obviously an issue of considerable concern to the rare disease community, both the patients, the academics. There is a huge amount of uncertainty at the moment. And I dare say if you knew the answers, what the answer was going to be, you'd share it with us. But how can we maintain, in the event of Brexit, the sort of collaboration that has built up over many years, the opportunities for joint working, for shared collaboration between universities, for the development of orphan medicinal products, and all of those things which have been contingent on the added value that comes from being part of a community of 450 million rather than 50 million.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the UK's position on ERNs and research collaboration has been extremely clear all the way through negotiations, that we want to maintain those networks, we want to maintain close participation. Obviously, it's two sides to the negotiation, and it's not entirely for us to say. Having said that, I do spend a reasonable amount of my time going to European meetings, meeting ministers, meeting chief medical officers from European countries. And what I tend to meet when I have discussions with them on all of these issues, and I always raise rare diseases, I always raise ERNs, and I always raise clinical trials at every single meeting that I go to, is an equal level of enthusiasm from ministers from across Europe. They are also keen not to lose the benefit, because obviously the UK has a particularly high level of expertise, whether it's in genomics, whether it's in clinical trials, whether it's in rare diseases specialties. And most of the health ministers from different countries know that it will be their patients in their countries who will lose out if they can't access the expertise, the data, and the engagement from the UK as well. So we are spending a lot of time doing informal engagement on these issues, because no matter what happens over the next few weeks and months, I'm quite sure that we will be able to maintain those relationships in one way or another. And I will make sure that I pursue it vigorously, because I know how vital it is for this community.
I'm sure everybody is going to wish you every success in that.
Thank
because
you.
It has been a very important element of the development of support. Practical question, how do we get involved in this national conversation that you've announced? What do we have to do to get our views heard by you and by your officials in the department?
Well, so we are doing some preliminary discussions with groups such as this on an individual level, but in the next few weeks and months we will be launching a national platform which will make it very clear and easy for people to engage with directly.
And money is always an issue. We heard this morning, for example, of a gene therapy for SMA, which Novartis has put a price of just over 2 million per patient on. With increasing numbers of therapies coming forward, often sort of very complex, edge of knowledge interventions that have taken an awful lot of research and development to bring about, how is the NHS going to make sure that those therapies are available to patients who need them without sort of ever increasingly draining the budget, the healthcare budget, and depriving other sections of our population?
Well, there's no simple answer to that, is there? I mean, if we had solved that, we would be kind of well beyond every nation is battling with this question. That's partly why we did kick off the NICE methodology, in order to try and smooth that part of the process. But what we've also done is we've recruited individuals into Department of Health and Social Care, but also into NHSE and I, who are able to negotiate bespoke contracts between the NHS and companies which are perhaps multi-year, which are share risk, and which are innovative, because it is our view that that's the direction that we will have to go in with these new types of therapies. We are in the early days of doing this, and some have begun as managed access schemes, as we have seen. CAR-T was obviously a new example, but we're going to have to tread this path as partners between the NHS, between industry, between the government, and we're going to have to find a way to drive down the cost of innovation as much as we can, so that drugs become as affordable as possible, which is what we're doing with AI and clinical trials through, making it as smooth as possible to get through the regulatory process, to get through the HTA process, to make data as available as possible, to make recruitment of patients into trials as smooth as possible. But also, once you do get to the other end and there is a price, to find ways to make funding it and affording it as possible as you can. And there is no one-size-fits-all, I don't think. And that attitude and mindset was not available between government and industry and the NHS 5 or 6 years ago. We are in a different place now, where that kind of collaboration and partnership and negotiation is genuinely possible. So it is encouraging, and we are moving in the right direction. We are not yet, I don't think, in the sort of perfect place, but I am encouraged, and I am able, I think, to report that we will see better access and we will see more drugs coming through, but it does require good faith behaviour from industry. It requires good faith behaviour from the NHS, and it requires every part playing their bit, which we are trying to do.
I think we see an example of, if you like, the willingness of all parties to think creatively in the recent progress towards making the new therapy for Baroness disease available on the NHS. That decision, which was announced last week, I think, or the week before.
Exactly, yes.
Now, I'm conscious of time, and I think we must regressively draw this session to a close. But thank you for your speech, which was hugely important, but also thank you for being willing to engage with the audience and to take questions and to answer them frankly and honestly. And we wish you every success in getting the results of your national conversation and turning it into policy that will really bring the benefits to patients with rare diseases right across the whole of the United Kingdom, and indeed with spin-offs for our European friends and colleagues. So, Minister, thank you very much for coming, and safe journey back.
Thank you. Thanks.